The villagers said her name only in whispers, Lena. To them, she was a shadow, a bad omen that walked like a woman. They called her cursed, and in that small, wind-beaten valley, such words carried the weight of truth. It had begun years ago, long before Lena understood what fear could do to people. Her mother had been a healer, the kind who spoke softly to herbs and read the sky as if it were scripture. When sickness swept through the village one bitter winter, her mother worked tirelessly, tending to the weak and the dying. But when the illness lingered, they turned on her. They said her hands that healed could also bring death. And when her mother died soon after, the villagers decided that evil didn't die with her, it passed to the daughter. Lena grew up with that curse hanging over her like fog. No one spoke to her unless forced, and when they did, their eyes never met hers. Children threw pebbles at her window and dared each other to shout, which, before running away, laughing. At the market, the baker would drop her bread on the counter rather than place it in her hand. She would leave her coins quietly and walk away without a word. She learned early that silence was safer than defending herself. So she stayed quiet. She lived in a small cottage on the far edge of the forest, where the trees grew thick and old, their branches whispering secrets to the wind. Her only companions were birds and the occasional fox that came close enough to steal scraps. She found peace in their company. They never called her names. But peace, like the forest mist, was fragile. That summer, the valley suffered one of its worst droughts in decades. Crops withered, rivers shrank to muddy veins, and the soil cracked like broken glass. When a sudden storm came, lightning tearing the sky open and fire sweeping across the fields, it felt like punishment from the heavens. The villagers looked for someone to blame, and they found her. Lena cursed the harvest, they said. Her mother cursed us before she died. Fear turned to fury, and fury needed an outlet. That night, as she sat by her hearth grinding herbs for her poultice, she heard shouting. Then stones struck her walls. A window shattered, glass cutting her arm. She didn't wait to see what would happen next. She grabbed her satchel, her cloak, and ran into the forest. The trees swallowed her like old friends, their shadows deep and protective. She wandered for hours until her legs gave out by a stream. There, under the pale light of a sickle moon, she cried for the first time in years. The world had taken everything, her mother, her home, her peace. She was 23, alone, and convinced that the curse they spoke of was real. Days passed. She built herself a small shelter deeper in the forest, near where the moss grew thick and the sound of water drowned her thoughts. She gathered berries and herbs, fished from the stream, and learned to live as the forest did, quietly, patiently, unseen. She began to speak again, but only to the trees and the wind. "It's just us now," she would murmur. "You and me." Sometimes, she wondered what the world beyond the woods looked like. Did the villagers ever regret driving her out? Did anyone remember her as anything more than a curse? She doubted it, but there were moments, brief, fragile ones, when she'd catch sunlight breaking through the canopy, painting the moss gold, and she'd think, maybe this is enough. It was on one of those quiet mornings that everything changed. She had gone down to the stream to gather water when she saw it, a dark shape tangled in the reeds. At first, she thought it was an animal, but then the shape groaned. Human. She rushed forward, kneeling in the shallows. A man lay there, blood streaking his face, his clothes torn and muddy. His chest rose weakly, his breath ragged. He opened his eyes, startlingly blue, fever bright, and for a moment, their gazes locked. Elias woke to the smell of herbs and the soft crackle of fire. The first thing he noticed was the steady rhythm of breathing beside him, and then, slowly, the realization hit, he was alive. A sharp pain tugged at his side, but it was bearable now, and even in his weakened state, he was aware of her presence. Lena. She was sitting across the small room, kneeling over a simmering pot, the flickering flames casting shadows across her pale, determined face. She didn't look up when he moved, yet he could feel her eyes on him, assessing, measuring. "How long?" he rasped. "Days," Lena replied softly, her voice steady but calm. "You lost a lot of blood. You're lucky I found you when I did." Why help me?" he asked, his voice hoarse and uncertain. Most people would have left him there, or worse. She could have, but she hadn't. The question lingered in the room like smoke from the hearth. Lena shrugged, almost apologetically. "Because I can. Because you needed it." She stirred the pot slowly, her mind elsewhere. "Because the forest, it guides me, sometimes. I listen." Elias tried to process her words. There was something in her, not arrogance, not pride, but a quiet strength that made him feel, for the first time in weeks, that the world was not entirely cruel. He tried to speak again, but the words caught in his throat. So he simply watched her work, studying the gentle precision of her movements. Every motion was deliberate, careful, yet full of a certain grace that made him feel safe. In the following days, Lena tended to his wounds with a knowledge that seemed almost instinctive. She cleaned and stitched, applied poultices, and brewed herbal teas that eased his pain and warmed his body. At first, Elias said little, wary of breaking the fragile bubble of silence that surrounded them. He observed the quiet harmony of her life, the way she moved like part of the forest itself, how she hummed softly to the fire, how the birds seemed to gather when she stepped outside. He had never met someone so utterly alone, yet so at peace with herself. Each day, she told him small things about the forest, the plants that could heal, the streams that held clean water, the animals that watched quietly, unafraid. Slowly, he began to speak again, first in whispers, then in sentences, until conversation stretched from minutes to hours. They shared stories of their pasts, though Lena spoke carefully, only revealing pieces of herself. "You must have a name," she said one evening, as he sat by the fire, the last of the sun dipping behind the trees. "Elias," he replied. "And you, Lena," she said. The name felt strange on her tongue, as if saying it aloud gave it weight it hadn't held before. "You've done more for me than anyone ever has," he said, his voice quiet, vulnerable. "Even when I was unconscious, I felt safe." Her cheeks flushed, though she quickly looked away, pretending to be absorbed in cleaning the pot. The moment was delicate, fragile, and yet charged with a tension neither of them could name. Days turned into weeks. Elias grew stronger, moving around the small clearing, helping with chores, fetching water, and gathering firewood. The forest became a strange, new world to him, intimate, alive, almost sentient in its quiet ways. He began to notice how Lena's eyes softened when she watched the birds, how her laughter, rare and musical, could lift the gloom from even the heaviest of afternoons. One evening, under a sky brushed with stars, Elias found himself unable to contain his thoughts any longer. "Lena," he whispered, his voice trembling, "why do you live like this? Why not the village?" She paused, kneeling by the fire, staring into its depths. "Because they fear what they don't understand," she murmured. "Because people like me don't belong there. They never have." He didn't flinch, didn't recoil. Instead, he reached across the fire and took her hand gently. It was warm, alive, steady. "I don't see a curse," he said quietly. "I see someone who saved me. Who gave me life when no one else would. And, I think I was meant to find this place. To find you." Her hand stiffened, then relaxed. She looked at him, startled by the honesty in his eyes, the certainty in his words. For years, she had hidden from the world, from people, from hope itself. And now, for the first time, someone didn't just see her, they understood her. The fire crackled between them, filling the quiet spaces with warmth. And as the forest watched silently, as the stars shimmered overhead, Lena felt something she had almost forgotten, the possibility of belonging, not just to a place, but to someone. Elias spoke again, his voice low but steady, carrying a weight she hadn't expected. "They called you cursed, Lena. But to me, you're home. And maybe I was never meant to be saved alone. Maybe I was meant to find you." The morning sunlight filtered through the trees, catching on dew-laden leaves and scattering gold across the forest floor. Lena walked beside Elias, her fingers brushing the tops of ferns as if greeting old friends. Today, he would leave, or at least, that was what she had thought. The path to the village lay ahead, and with it, the world she had fled, the world that had called her cursed. Elias walked quietly beside her, his steps careful on the uneven ground. His wound had healed fully, though a faint scar ran along his side, a reminder of how close he had come to death. He glanced at Lena now and then, catching her in the sunlight, and something in his eyes made her heart tighten. It wasn't fear or caution, those were feelings she was used to, but warmth, an unwavering certainty she had never known. "Are you ready?" he asked softly, his voice hesitant. She stopped, looking at the path ahead, then at him. "I've lived here so long, I don't know if I can face the village," she admitted, her voice trembling. The thought of returning to a place that had never welcomed her, a place filled with fear and suspicion, made her chest tighten. Elias reached out and took her hand in his, steady and warm. You don't have to face them, he said. Not now, not ever. You don't belong to their fear. You belong where you are seen, where you are loved. By me. Her heart skipped. She had hidden herself away for so long, building walls around her life, around her heart, that she had nearly forgotten what it felt like to be wanted, to be chosen. Yet here he was, a man who had arrived by chance, saved her, and somehow seen past the whispered curses of her past. He saw her. They continued walking, hand in hand, the forest alive around them with birdsong and rustling leaves. Lena felt a strange clarity, an awareness that the world was larger than the valley that had cast her out, that life could be something more than isolation and suspicion. And yet, she also felt a pang of fear. Love was unfamiliar, trust was fragile, and hope had always been dangerous. Elias, she said, stopping abruptly, I've lived my life in the shadows. What if this doesn't last? He lifted her chin gently, forcing her to meet his gaze. Then we make it last, he said with quiet conviction. We don't let the past decide our future. We choose it ourselves. The words sank deep into her chest, into the part of her that had been closed off for so long. She wanted to believe them, to trust the man who had seen her not as cursed, but as home. And in that moment, something shifted, a subtle yet irrevocable change. When they reached the edge of the forest, Lena paused. Beyond the trees, the valley lay sprawled under the morning sun, familiar yet distant. She could almost hear the villagers, whispers carried on the wind, could almost see their fearful eyes. For a moment, the old fear threatened to rise, but she held Elias' hand tighter and drew a deep breath. I don't belong there, she whispered. You belong here, he said firmly. With me, we can build a life where no one's whispers matter, where no one's fear can reach us. She looked at him, really looked, and saw the unwavering honesty in his eyes. This was no fleeting emotion, no passing fancy. This was someone who had chosen her, who had arrived at the moment she had least expected it, and refused to leave. Lena let herself believe it. She allowed herself to feel the warmth of his hand, the steadiness of his presence, the unspoken promise that she no longer had to face the world alone. The forest around them seemed to lean in, the birdsong swelling as if affirming her choice, the wind carrying away the last remnants of doubt. Elias smiled, a gentle, unshakable smile, and stepped closer. Stay, he said, his voice low but full of certainty. Stay here, with me. Not because you have to, but because this is home. Her eyes filled with tears, but they were not tears of fear or sorrow. They were tears of relief, of joy, of a heart finally allowed to open. She nodded, unable to speak, and leaned into him. The world she had known, the one that had called her cursed, was gone, replaced by something softer, warmer, and infinitely safer. Years later, the villagers still whispered of Lena, but their stories had changed. They spoke of the pale woman who had disappeared into the forest with a stranger, leaving behind nothing but the echoes of laughter and the hint of a life reborn. They said the woods glowed on certain nights, as if some unseen magic had taken root among the trees, and those who listened closely could hear two voices laughing together, one soft, one warm, as if the forest itself had been transformed by love. And in that forest, Lena and Elias built their life. They tended the garden together, cared for the animals, and wandered the woods as partners, confidants, and eventually something more. No curse followed them, no shadow lingered. Only the quiet, abiding certainty that they had found each other, and in each other, a home.